watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
As an editor, I get invited every once in a while to a First Amendment discussion, whether national or international or local, at a journalism school or university or here or there. And it's with a dose of some guilt. Why some guilt? Because one recognizes one's preposterous good fortune. And just to tell you a personal story, I had never been an editor of anything other than my high school newspaper before beginning as the editor of the New Yorker. Whatever preposterous calculation went into that decision, I leave to somebody else. I will tell you my experience of being an editor and what the First Amendment meant, in my very rapid discovery, is after a couple of months of loosely defined editing the New Yorker, we had a story by a journalist you probably know named Seymour Hersh. And this is 1998, and Cy wrote a story in which he accused almost everybody of almost everything, including the idea that the Prime Minister of Russia had taken bribes from Saddam Hussein and other various crimes and misdemeanors. I had been at the Washington Post as a boy, and the only thing I knew was that Ben Bradley, then the great editor of the Washington Post, would call Katharine Graham, the proprietor of the Washington Post, and say, I just wanted to let you know we're going to publish, I don't know, Watergate tomorrow. It was called the No Surprises Rule. So I called my proprietor, Cy Newhouse, who owns the magazine Lock, Stock, and Barrel, and I said, we're going to publish this story accusing almost everybody of almost everything next week, but don't worry, it's been checked unto a fare thee well, and lawyers have read it, and I have great confidence, and I even know all the sources that the reader may not know. And there was a long pause at the end of the telephone, and Cy Newhouse said, that sounds very interesting. That was it. That was the last time I ever called him about any story, about anything, whether it was Abu Ghraib or anything of the kind. And there may be limitations on what we do, and there may be ideological arguments about what we do, but in terms of the issues that we're going to discuss tonight, we are extraordinarily, the people on this panel are extraordinarily, as you are, fortunate to be in the situation we are in. Not everyone is.
We have a new topic today, which is, by respect of some communities, some words should be forbidden and censored. This is the topic of today. Not the sort of words which helped to commit and did commit genocide in Rwanda and could commit now genocide in Burundi, but these sort of words which are supposed to attack, to indignate, to blaspheme a community or a religion, especially in the field of Islamism. This is a new, not only, but especially. On this, I give you very quickly my personal reply, which I submit according to the tradition of this place to the discussion of the audience and of my fellow partners. My reply is the following, 2 points or 3 points. Point number one, for any community, and therefore for this community of communities, which is a nation, which is a people, a nation, freedom of speech is the first of all the freedoms. if you take away, if you retire, if you withdraw the freedom of speech, it is as if you withdrew the main brick which makes the whole castle, the whole house consistent. So our Muslim friends who say, for instance, that some sort of speeches, some sort of cartoons should be forbidden in the name of the respect of Islam must know that if we take away this freedom, all the other freedoms will fall apart. This is what Benjamin Constant said. This is the theory of Alexis de Tocqueville, and I know that you have in this country many thinkers whom I know much less than all of you, who would say the same. Second reply which I deliver to the audience, and I submit to discussion. There is a sort of trick, there is a sort of tour de passe-passe, there is a sort of operation of contraband. How do you say contraband? Smuggle. There is a smuggling operation. These sort of people tell us we defend respect of our community. In reality, they say something else. They defend some values which have nothing to do with democracy, with respect of the community, and so on. Especially in the field of Islam, you have today a real fight inside Islam between democratic forces and integrist, fundamentalist or fascist forces. When you preach the limitation of freedom of speech, you give your favor to, you give your preference to, you give a help to the integrist, fundamentalist and fascist wings, tendencies inside Islam. We must know that one begins with the so-called respect of the values of Islam. In reality, the real deal, the real undercurrent smuggling is to fight for the denial of the faith of the women, the possibility of killing of somebody who changed religion, the apostasy, and so on. And this is number two. And number three, what I personally think is that the real respect of a community, the real respect of a religion, whatever it is, consists precisely in showing that she is able, or it is able, to stand, to receive, without being broken, without falling into pieces, these sorts of attacks. The right of blasphemy, blasphemy you say? Mm-hmm. The right of blasphemy is a right for the free thinkers, of course, but it is also a right which I do think, when it is implemented, not weakens, but reinforce, proves the solidity and the consistency of the religion or the community which is concerned. A religion which is not able to stand, to do with blasphemy. A religion which would feel not only wounded but killed, but stricken to death by a blasphemy, is a religion which is already dead. So what I mean is that even in the interest of these sorts of communities, even if you take the point of view of those who, with real faith, with real soul and mind, are attached to their values, right to blasphemy is essential also for them. Christianity would have been dead since long without Voltaire, and without other free thinkers who have implemented blasphemy, helped the Christian thinkers to resist blasphemy, to build some, to develop some antidotes, to develop some forces of resistance to that. And it will be the same for Islam. So for the sake of democracy, for the sake of anti-fascism, and for the sake of these religions or communities of today who pretend to be wounded by free speech, we have to defend free speech more than ever today.
Thank you. Peter All.
Let me take a slightly different tack. As professor of Islam, I'd love to be able to argue Islam is so unique, it's totally different from everything else. In fact, it's as conventional as any other religious tradition. Religious traditions espouse truth claims. The argument is that if you embrace that truth claim, that truth should be embodied in the way you live. The dilemma comes when religious communities become either partially or fully engaged with the apparatus of the state and are able, therefore, to impose a vision of homogeneity on their society. Christian society did this for centuries. The blasphemy laws in the UK were abolished in the 1990s. Now, am I saying how terrible the Brits were? No. It harks back to the tradition when Christianity was the ideological underpinning of many European societies. So the issue isn't embedded within a particular religious tradition. It's the extent to which a society engages this effort on the part of religious communities to argue for their truth claims and that their vision ought to be embraced or imposed on everyone else, and how the rest of society reacts against it. Quite interestingly, in contrast to the European experience, I assure you, you do not find many American Muslims screaming that they are being offended in the United States. Why? Because to be an American is to be offended. Any religious community that doesn't learn how to navigate the criticisms, the blasphemies that occur on a daily basis, be you Jewish, be you Christian, be you evangelical, be you Muslim, be you a secularist, is not engaged fully in the structures of American society. In a sense, it works here because everyone's in the same boat. And the ability of Muslims to adapt in the United States as immigrants, in fact, they've adapted more quickly, more effectively than almost any other immigrant community in the history of this country. So it is not Islam that represents some kind of threat to democracy, but it is true that immigrants coming from homogeneous environments where, in fact, religious ideals were enshrined in the structures of the state do have difficulty engaging societies in which freedom of speech is cherished, and you better be ready to take your lumps. To end, I would also say that societies that haven't done quite as well as one would like in coping with the influx of immigrant populations tend to have more of these ideological conflicts, underneath which are frequently very important social and political conflicts that are far more important, I would say, necessarily, than arguments over a burqa or whether you wear a headscarf to school. However, let me end by saying the construction of secularism is not the same as you move from the United States to Europe. In class, I could care less whether you wore bananas on your head. It is irrelevant, the dress code in an American classroom. But Americans are horrified at the thought of supporting religious schools with tax dollars. Laïcité in France is focused on the school system, on ensuring that everyone becomes a French citizen in that context. So no, you can't wear a yarmulke, you can't wear a cross, you can't wear a headscarf. But they will go ahead and support religious schools because they want religious schools to be of the quality of the public school system. It's a totally different construction of secularism. I'm not arguing one's better or one is worse, but they're different. And it's in that context that one has to understand the function of religious ideology and the secular state.
Thank you. Kent Greenawalt.
Thanks. So I'm going to take my 5 minutes to try to sort of sketch the legal and constitutional situation here in the United States. The legal status is mainly controlled by our First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Now, originally that applied only against the federal government, and it's made applicable against the states by the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War. In our early history, states had laws against blasphemy, casting aspersions on or denying Christian truths. The only blasphemy that was wrong was against Christianity, and also against profanity. And this was true even in states that had no establishment of religion provisions. Now such laws would be regarded as violations of the Establishment Clause and the Free Speech Clause, and if these assertions were made as part of somebody's religious convictions contrary to what they were blaspheming, it would be protected by free exercise as well. So what are the ground rules for when speech can be punished? Well, if you directly solicit somebody else to commit a crime, that can be punished. But if you incite to criminal violence, more generally, like kill all the Jews, something along those lines, that can be punished only if the advocacy is directed to or inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and is likely to incite or produce such action. So that's very limiting, even in terms of advocacy of illegal or criminal action. Now this leaves us with the categories of what we might loosely call hate speech or fighting words. And this would be reached by breach of the peace statutes or harassment statutes that would forbid these. So this is language that's deeply offensive to the audience. And we can imagine that forms of blasphemy could constitute an extreme denigration of a group of believers or individuals. And we do know that some forms have produced violent reactions. So could there be a basis for prohibition here? Well, fighting words have been conceived as in face-to-face encounters, and the comments are protected unless they produce a violent response in the average addressee. Now, there are nuances about who could the average addressees be, what percentages of violent responses would you need to think there'd be, and some notion of equality of audiences and sort of basic ideas. But I'm going to pass over all of those. So one problem is that you might produce somebody fighting, but that's very limited. Hate speech can be wounding to listeners, and I think we have to be aware of that thinking about these general problems, that something that is directed at an individual that's very offensive and abusive can be quite wounding. And that's especially true if the comments are actually aimed, as they sometimes are, at humiliating somebody. And sometimes people are sought out just to humiliate them. So probably in theory that could be protected, but it's so hard to decide what somebody's motive is when they engage in this kind of action. And there are also a question of long-term harms, that perpetuating negative stereotypes, silencing people in a minority or oppressed group, and we can think of sexist and racist speech along these lines. And forms of blasphemy could be used in this kind of way. So I think we could imagine situations in which would be a kind of hate speech that could conceivably be punished, but that's a very narrow category. There would be more latitude in campus speech codes, although I think one has to be very careful about those, and in workplace harassment. Discrimination on the basis of religion is a form of workplace harassment, and we might imagine that blasphemy about somebody's religion directed at them could be a form of harassment. But in general, if publications are deeply offensive on religious grounds, the basic rule in the United States is that people have to tolerate that, and that on balance this is desirable as an aspect of religious freedom and freedom of speech. The United States is more speech protective than virtually any other country, and I think that in an overall evaluation of whether that's desirable or not, one has to think a bit about history and culture. But in general, I think the idea of a lot of protection for speech is on balance a good idea.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Philippe Schmidt.
Great. Kent, I'm going to follow up on you because you just explained the legislation in the US, and I'm very happy that after hearing Kent, you understand that it's not true to say, it's not correct to say that there's no limit in the US to freedom of speech. There is always a limit, and the controversy is, where is the limit? That's the controversy. That's the controversy, very interesting, and in fact the views in the US are very different from the views in other Western countries, Western democracies, so not completely different countries. And the lawyers, the professors, the thinkers, the politicians are not able to discuss and to go forward together on what is the limit. The problem is today we need to have a common limit. And why do we need to have a common limit? It's because of the internet. Freedom of expression today will occur mainly on the internet. That's where everybody can speak and can send a message all over the world. And if you have a legislation in one country, it will not apply if someone can go in another country and of course send messages, open a website, be a member of Facebook or whatever. So we need today to have a common approach, and I think I would like today to be also the beginning of a common approach, because up to today, when you have people, again, lawyers, whatever, speaking together on those kind of issues, they cannot understand each other. I'm in a, not only me, but in a different position, because both educated in Europe and in the US, I'm like in the middle of the Atlantic, and I can feel and understand both values, because you said why we have different legislation on free speech, denial of the Holocaust, all those issues, it's because of our past. But today, the future means that we have to find a common approach. We have to find a common legislation. It's really, I think, today with the internet, for me, the main topic, because the US, the First Amendment, is it the good answer? Do you think that indeed, in fact, the incitement to violence should be the only limit? Or, as we think in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, so very close to here, you have also to respect the dignity of a person. And of course, now comes in all the issue regarding the defamation of religion. On this issue, we are very clear. We protect human beings. We do not protect ideas in no way. And I just want to tell you that yes, there is a trend at the United Nations Human Rights Council to try to have defamation of religion. They did pass 3 resolutions in 5 years. But you have to know also that in Ireland, so member of the European Union, they just passed a blasphemy law. So we think that it will not be legal because of European legislation. But for the time being, you've got a new legislation very recently in Ireland, and it's not the only European country. So yes, you see, we go from the First Amendment to defamation of religion. In the middle, you've got countries like France and other European countries. And now, if we want to have a common ground, we need to find a common legislation. That's really my approach.
Philippe, maybe I'll begin with Philippe. I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting. We've just been witness to an international meeting in Copenhagen where what was at stake was quite potentially an ecological catastrophe that could swamp us all. And we left with an agreement so slight, so dissolute as to beggar the imagination. What we've had a description of here is the vast differences of whether blasphemy is even good or bad. How do you suggest monitoring the internet, legislating the internet, when the cultures involved, whether it's even difference between the French and the United States, much less Saudi Arabia and France or Yemen, or how do you, what do you have in mind as the realm of the possible, or even the realm of the good and the desirable?
It will be a long time to arrive to something that will be agreed by all the countries. However, we can start. We can start the United States and the other Western countries. I mean, for instance, when you fight cyber hate in Europe, our main problem is not Saudi Arabia. It's because, you know, if someone wants to establish itself, it's not going to Saudi Arabia. It's going
I think
to
maybe
United
then you
States.
should give us examples of what cyber hate are, and what their dangers are and why they should be acted upon.
Okay, so for instance, if you have, and again, we are not tonight going to decide whether or not denial of the Holocaust should be authorized. When I say we are not going to discuss, of course we can. I don't want to. I'm for free speech. But you've got many countries where denial of the Holocaust is forbidden, period. Okay? You've got democratic countries, Germany, Austria, Australia, Canada, many. And if you want if you have someone who is having a website, for instance, with denial of Holocaust materials, if this person is in France, you can go after it. You go after this person. So what is going to do this person is going to establish in the US. And thanks to the First Amendment, or because of the First Amendment, we will not be able to pursue this person.
Can I hear from this side of the panel whether legislation against the denial of the Holocaust is necessarily either a priority or good, and extended to any either conspiracy thinking or preposterous historical theorizing? Bernard?
On one side, one could say, and I have a lot of friends who say, it is so stupid to deny Holocaust, and the truth is so strong, the evidence is so clear, that we should let the good currency get rid of the bad currency. Why make a law? This is an acceptable argument. We could think like that. On the other side, the reason why, as for myself, after having thought at length on this question for years, I finally decided that the law was good is the following. I will say it, I'm sorry, very shortly, in few words, but it supposes it could be developed. For me, the denial of the genocide is part of the genocide itself. It is part of the genocide. It is very clear in the genocide against Jews, as you know, the structure of the genocide supposed had embedded into itself the fact of the denial. The SS, Himmler, and so on said, not only we will kill them, but we are going to erase the trace of the killing. The denial is part of the crime. Same for the Armenians. The committers, the executioners of the Holocaust of the Armenians said exactly the same. It is not enough to kill. We have to, at the same time, in the same movement, in the same breathing, we have to commit and erase the crime. So there is a very peculiar structure of genocide. It is not a crime as another one. There is a peculiar structure which, having the denial integrated in the crime, makes the possibility and imposes, I think, the necessity of punishing the denial, which is part of the crime.
I'd like Ken and Peter also to address this.
So I think there is an argument about whether it should be not allowed in European countries, but your reason struck me as quite implausible for the following reason. Assuming that part of the idea of genocide, or that particular genocide, was that it was also going to be covered up, that was part of what it was. But now we're generations later, and the question is, should people be able to deny that that existed or not? To me, it wouldn't make any difference. Suppose their basic idea had been, let's publicize that to everybody, and that it's great we're doing this, and we're the same few generations later, and some people are denying that it took place. So I don't see the connection between the denial or that it took place generations later and what the underlying philosophy was of the genocide in the first place. That seems to be a pretty remote relation.
Very briefly, I don't want to legislate against stupidity. That I want to see it out in front, and it usually is an indicator of something far more pernicious. And if, in fact, that stupidity represents a deeply ingrained evil and hate, I want it out in public so it can be dealt with and debated. You legislate against it, it never cures the problem, it pushes it underground.
It is not stupidity. Look, even genocide of Rwanda is very interesting. It's really something which is peculiar to genocides, which is part of genocide. Even in Rwanda, a few years after, a few months after, maybe at the very moment you had already people practicing the denial. You have not denial of anything. Nobody denies that New York is in the United States. Nobody denies today that the earth is round, and so on. There is a very specific mania concerning genocide, and genocide only, including maybe Cambodia and Darfur. It is really part of the scheme. It is really part of the enterprise. So it is really part of the crime. It is not only stupidity, not only a fantasy. We have to think metaphysically the link between the denial and the crime. This is a real point.
Bernard,
after I've been told that, law or not law, this is a
Bernard,
discussion.
if I walk into even a hotel bookstore in Cairo, I can buy copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. When I lived in Washington, D.C., and I walked into a left-wing bookstore, I forget what it was, I could buy copies of Lenin and Stalin. Where does the legislating stop? Isn't the question have to do with social context, where buying a copy of Stalin in the United States in 1989 is fairly harmless and actually an academic endeavor, whereas quite possibly buying the other book in the other place has another repercussion? Where does the legislating stop and not?
I'm not in favor of censoring anything. Stalin, of course not. Lenin, even less. And even protocol of the Elders of Zion, I'm not in favor of censoring. There is a debate in France about Louis Ferdinand Céline. Louis Ferdinand Céline, you have a twofold work.
These are, excuse me, the novels of and now notebooks of Céline, who wrote Journey to the End of the Night, and whose anti-Semitism runs even more deeply than we even knew before until these things were published just recently.
Exactly.
There's a good piece in the New York Review of Books about it.
You have huge novels of Céline which belongs to the best of literature of the 20th century, and you have 3 books Bagatelle pour un massacre, École des cadavres et Les beaux draps, which are disgusting anti-Semitic books. There is a debate in France on the question to know if they have to be censored or not. They are censored. I'm against. I think they should not be censored. People should make their own opinion about that. No doubt. The protocol of the Elders of Zion is so stupid, is so crazy. This I agree. They should be allowed. They should be allowed. In the Arab countries, the problem is not to censor Protocol of Elder of Zion. It is to put the question of the fascism in Arab countries, which has never been really raised, this question. It is much further than the book Protocol. There is a real participation of the Arab world, as in Europe, to the fascism, and this question has never been uncovered. So the question today is not to censor, it is to uncensor. In the Arab country, the work to do is not to put censorship on this book or that. It is the contrary, to suppress the censorship on a huge piece of the collective memory, which is the fascist part of the Arab memory. You have in Egypt, you have in Jordan, you have in Iraq, you have in Syria, a big bunch of the local memory, which is as compromised with fascism as France, as Italy, as Romania, as Hungary, and so on. The question has been raised. The mourning has been done, le deuil, the mourning, the sorrow and the mourning. In Germany, in France, it was not so easy. It was a hard work, very painful. Some families have been broken, some lives and some reputation have been destroyed, but it has been done all over the world, except in these countries where you can find the Protocol of Elder. So the question is not to censor, the contrary. It is to open.
Peter, we speak of the Arab world. Maybe you could speak of the diversity, if you like, of the state of play of these questions there.
I would agree with Bernard that you find a number of Islamic societies and a number of Arab societies that really are totalitarian and in which discourse is controlled and there is a kind of political ideology that really is imposed and taught in the schools, et cetera, et cetera. It's completely unhealthy. It stifles, really, the educated elites who do try to move beyond the limitations. Added that the religious right is a horribly threatening environment, both within Islamic societies as well as outside. But it isn't because of Islam. It's because of the state of these various societies in terms of economics, politics, and their relationships with the state of Israel. That has been the catalyst for really this cliche and deeply embedded, frequently anti-Semitic view of Jews and Israeli society. Now, I think, again, within Israeli society, you're not going to find the happiest depictions of Islam and or Arabs. But I think, again, that has a lot to do with the political issues and social issues, not fundamentally religious.
Peter, some years ago now, what year was Yitzhak Rabin assassinated? Mid-90s, right? The question came up whether the actual campaign in which Bibi Netanyahu was taking place, there was a lot of talk, loose talk and political talk, that because Rabin was negotiating with and coming to agreements with the Palestinians, that he was deserving of violence. That according to law, as interpreted, Jewish law, as interpreted by some of these people, that anytime you give away any part of Jewish lands, I'll spare you the scare quotes, whether it's the West Bank or Gaza or any other portion of Israeli, either occupied or Israeli land, that it was legitimate to visit violence upon that politician. There was a lot of loose talk. some of it implicitly, in the opinion of some, encouraged by major political candidates, including Netanyahu. We know what happened. A fanatic shot and killed Yitzhak Rabin. Should that kind of speech, whether it was in yeshivot or in the street or in political speech, been banned and legislated against? And you want to take that, Philippe?
In the case of Rabin, I mean, we remember very well that indeed there was direct incitement to violence. So yes, in this case, I think even with the First Amendment, we could have prosecuted the person who were inciting people to violence. And that's something very interesting, if I may.
You would have put a lot of people in jail at that point.
Yeah.
Just for fact's sake.
Yeah, and again, the fact is, and it goes again to what happened in Rwanda, and with the internet now, you've got incitement to hatred that destroy life. And yes, in this case, you need to protect the life of those persons. And you've got also something that you know better in the US than in France, for instance, cyberbullying. You know cyberbullying? The fact is that you've got now kids and they are going to be harassed through the internet. And I did a conference at the UN like 6 months ago, and I heard, and I'm sure you know this story, of this young person, 14 years old, and he was harassed by the other student through the internet. And his parents were not in a position to see that because it was on his computer. So at school he was harassed, he went back to home, he was harassed, always harassed. And again, it was not direct incitement to violence, but yes, they destroyed his life, and as a matter of fact, he committed suicide. So, and that's something with the internet that comes and comes. And again, I mean, I love the internet, it's amazing. But yes, when we need to put some limits, we have to. And yes, in the case of Rabin, obviously some of the people could have been jailed, and who knows? I mean, perhaps it could have changed the life of Rabin and of the region.
I think Ken wanted to say something on this question of internet legislation.
Just on this, we do have a law against threatening the life of the president, so that's sort of special. But I think picking up on your point about this thing, it's so hard to know when the discussion is serious. People talked about killing Obama during the campaign, and so on, and it's very difficult. I just wanted to mention on the internet thing, it's not just the United States government negotiating something that might be some kind of compromise with the other countries, but this, you know, suppose you agreed on something, the Supreme Court might come along and say, no, that violates the First Amendment. So
you can change the First Amendment.
I think that'll only apply if you're a corporation, so far as I can tell. In a corporation with eyes.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because if I just one remark, I mean, it's very important. The First Amendment applies only to the government. So when you have companies like Facebook saying, okay, we don't want to stop, for instance, denial of the Holocaust material, it's wrong. I mean, they can do it. It's just their policy. If they want to do it, they can do it. Nobody can prevent them from doing it.
Please join me in thanking our guests tonight for a great panel.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD and we thank you for your kind support.